Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a discussion on choosing metrics your teams won't hate. This is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with Pluralsight. This webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the hashtag effective teams channel. Emphasis on using hashtag effective teams after. I'm sure there's going to be lots of fruitful conversations in Slack. We may also have time to answer a couple of questions live towards the end, so please do submit those questions in the Q&A feature on Zoom. So let's get started with some introductions. My name is Lima. I'll be your moderator today, and I'm currently an engineering leader at Spotify. I'm joined by some awesome engineering leaders who are ready to share their experiences and insights. So let's get started with some intros. First, I'd like to introduce Jason Brewer. Jason has always had a passion for technology and people, leading him to an engineering management career. He wants to make the most of any endeavor, and it strives to provide support and encouragement for his teams and peers to achieve their definite goals. Hello, Jason. Next, we have Nono Gimby. Nono is an engineering leader at Airbnb, where she leads a team of backend engineers. She is passionate about investing in people. It all starts with people is her favorite quote. I love that quote. So true. Nono is an active mentor and certified leadership coach. Hello, Nono.
Hello.
All right, finally, we have Mike Hoy. Mike Hoy is Flow's Director of Developer Engagement at Pluralsight. His secret plan is to turn software development into the inclusive, humane, empirically sound discipline in the world that needs to be. That is a great goal. Welcome, everyone. Shall we get started?
Thank you very much.
Cool. As an engineering leader, choosing a metric and making decisions based on that metric is one of the most important things we can do. It's critical that we have the right data to influence the decisions we make. We use metrics to measure the effectiveness of a new feature introduced in the scope of an A/B test. We use metrics to measure the reliability of engineering systems in production. And we also use metrics to measure performance of our teams and our wonderful engineers. In this panel, so what's the key to measuring a performance in a way that fosters trust and buy-in with your reports? Which metrics should we be choosing and how should we use them? In this panel, our engineering leaders will explore how to get about choosing the metrics that accurately capture the complexity and nuances of your team's work. We'll be discussing whether it's possible to measure individual performance in a constructive and meaningful way, and how to make sure you're creating a supportive and collaborative work environment as a leader. So let's get into our questions. We'll start simple. Why would you use metrics in your engineering organization to measure team performance? What decisions or outcomes are you seeking by having these data points? Jason, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Let's start at the very beginning, like metrics. Metrics is just a way to measure progress. I'm sure we all heard you can't improve what you don't measure. Trying to lose weight, trying to run faster, you're trying to eat better, you're trying to live your best life, right? You got to have those metrics to measure your progress. I like the metrics because it kind of gets me more engaged in what I'm doing. It's a little bit more fun to see that bar go up and to the right. It just gets me charged up. So with that data, you can start to set some goals and objectives, define what you feel is excellent for yourself to get to your goal. So for my team in our organization, we use metrics not just to set a goal, but to objectively measure how a team is doing or how an individual is doing, to have an idea of how they are performing. So I will say for our team, we use some of the metrics that we have at Intuit MailChimp. There are some specific ones. We call them excellence. So we track like MTTR, we track how well we're doing in projects. But then my team has a vision of trying to deliver excellence and trying to be one of the best teams here at MailChimp. So one of the things that we do is we have those operational excellence metrics, but then from those, we develop our own internally to measure ourselves against our own measurement, which that measurement is usually higher than what Intuit wants for us. Because as I said earlier, like we're trying to be one of the best teams here. We're trying to strive for excellence. We're trying to do the best we can each time. So we want to raise that bar. Those metrics give us that measurement to try to slowly climb up those stairs to get to the top and meet our full potential.
That sounds great. I would love to be excellent too. Does this, or do you relate to this, Mike, and Nono similarly?
So I'm interested in metrics for sort of the same reason, but I'm interested in metrics because finding out the granular performance of a team can really show me where I can excel as a leader, as a manager and a leader of that team. One of the things that we can do, one of the things that's very difficult about leading in a technical context is that so much of our successes are very non-specific. We make decisions, and sometimes it's challenging for us to say with a lot of confidence that this decision worked and we should continue doing it. This change in our process, in our planning, in our leadership styles, is not effective, and maybe we should roll that back. And so the thing that I'm really interested in terms of team leadership, is being able to establish a set of metrics to understand, the details of the process, and then say, my theory, my hypothesis is we need to change how we act as a team in order to accomplish this goal. And the thing I love about good metrics, particularly as aggregated into something that I can see as a leader, is that lets me say, I was right. It gives me the confidence to say, I am right. We should keep doing this. We should double down on this. And if you approach them with humility, it also lets you say, we tried this. It didn't have the effect we wanted, and we can roll it back. And being able to approach leadership through that empirical lens is not only motivating, but it's a very powerful way to build trust with your team and your organization, because you can say, we've accomplished this thing we set out to accomplish.
Right. And it's less of a black box on how you're like measuring or why you're making decisions. Yeah, that makes total sense. Shall we move on to our next question? Okay. In practice, what are some straightforward good metrics that you use to give the audience an idea of what's been most effective for your teams? We've kind of listed a few, but maybe like just reiterate like one or two metrics that you all have used in your experiences. Jason, would you like to start?
Sure. So I'll reiterate some of the ones that we've had already. I would say for a very high level, to kind of meet into our vision of being a high performing team, like especially in engineering operations, there has to be a balance between project work and operations work. We really try to lean towards more project work because we want to have impact in the outcomes that we're delivering. So one of the big things that we look at is our day-to-day activities. We look at MTTR. MTTR has helped us develop understanding of what things are alerting. Like, let's get really granular to understand what things are alerting. From there, we try to track those things and come up with recommendations that we can reduce some of those alerts, that allows our team to not focus on the day-to-day activities and focus more on project work.
Right.
Another one, a big one for us is just projects as well. Like, we want to make sure when we're building out a project, we have a template on how we do projects. So from tech specs all the way down to project retrospectives, like, these are measurements for us to understand how well we're working on a project. And then throughout the year, we just measure ourselves to make sure, based off the artifacts we deliver in that project, that we're hitting those dates. If we're not hitting those dates, we need to understand why, make adjustments to how we're approaching a project, and kind of move forward. The other thing is, like, let's focus on what's important.
Mm-hmm.
I have a bit of a pet peeve. Like, when we're doing backlog grooming, I don't want tickets in there that are really old. If they're that old, either they're not important, or we're allowing things to slip through the cracks, and we need to make sure that we are addressing those. So backlog grooming and average age of tickets is another thing that's really important for our team.
Oh, interesting. Average age of tickets. I've never heard of that one. That's like a timely, that's like I guess we should put TTLs on our tickets so they can magically disappear. Just kidding.
Oh, I like that.
Just kidding. Mike, did you have another perspective?
So there is and the idea of time to live for tickets is not an unreasonable metric, right? Because if it isn't, things that don't rise to the level of priorities will ultimately never become priorities, right?
Right.
We should be honest about that and willing to be decisive about the work that we're doing and the work that you're not doing. One of the other metrics that I've had a lot of success with, and that really brings the best out of a team, are metrics like responsiveness time. Not just how long a ticket has lived, but how quickly people respond to tickets, how quickly people review patches. And the reason I love that one is, first and foremost, because it is, as a leader, that is my responsibility, right, for coaching people through the priorities of their team. But the other one is that compound interest is magic. The sooner you can respond to your colleagues' work is the sooner you can build on top of it. And it's a great metric, not just for engineering effectiveness, but also for introducing the idea of metrics to a team, right? It's a one where you can almost invariably rack up a lot of efficiency wins early just by telling your team our priority is to help each other, not necessarily build new work, but to make each other's work more effective. Here is a metric we are going to strive to optimize for, where we're going to respond to our colleagues' work as quickly as we can. And based on that, you can often accelerate a team's development processes without insisting on any more work, right? We respond to each other's work faster by prioritizing it. And the magic of this is that before you have that metric, like of response time, all of that opportunity is invisible. And then you have a number, and suddenly it is a world of opportunity for you as a leader. It's one of my favorite things because it's where you can often put the thin edge of the wedge as far as data-driven engineering leadership is concerned.
Fascinating. I'm going to go off playbook for a second because you said something that was interesting you said something along the lines of like introducing metrics to a team that doesn't use them in this context. Posing this question to all of you, are there signs that you would look out for that would suggest this team needs like metrics in this sense? Like, here are the signs that we need to start adopting metrics to measure team performance or individual performance. Have you been in that situation? Go ahead, Nona.
Yeah, I can take this. I think it depends. It's really observing how the team is performing. For example, if there is a lot of incidents, some burnout. For example, if you observe that people are getting tired, the on-call rotation is not going as expected, and things are always on fire. Or if you observe also, for example, the velocity, like we don't deliver anything at the end of the sprint, we are always moving a task from a sprint to another. Those are good signals that will tell you that there is something that is not going as expected, and that maybe we should start tracking and try to understand what is going on. And for example, for the burnout and for the incident, it could be to understand how many times people get paged, and how many times, for example, people get paged during the night. How long does it take to people to shut down something that's currently burning? And for velocity, like how long does a task stay in a sprint? Like there are tasks sometimes that have a long life. So those are things that I think the signals is not something that will be visible, but as a manager, as you are working closely with your teams, you are able to see the signs, and they are pretty obvious, like the burnout, people not showing up, being discouraged, demoralized. This leads to some conversation to understand exactly where the problem is coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that you said jives with something that we say with A/B testing often. With A/B testing, you'll hear folks say the metrics will tell you what is happening, but not why it's happening. And I think those signals that you described can kind of give a little bit of the why it's happening, but having those metrics will help you figure out more. Yeah.
One of the things we like to say, oh, pardon me.
No, so it's kind of a combination of, what the number says and some investigation and digging. That's why we will still need people and managers to lead teams.
Absolutely.
We're fond of saying that the metrics are the beginning of the conversation, not the end of it, right? And one of the things we found to be consistently true is that every outlier in your data is a story about your team that you haven't heard yet. Right. And being able to look into the whys of that one lonely data point way off the side of the graph is that there's a person assigned to that data point. Like that piece of information is something that matters in somebody's life. Right. And maybe the answer is that this person needs more coaching. Maybe this person needs to be told that they can take a break and that that's allowed. Right. Maybe that person needs to be sent on vacation immediately because they haven't taken a vacation in 8 or 10 months or 2 years, because they're afraid that if they leave, everything will go off the rails. And that not only is that probably not true, but it can't be allowed to be true for a healthy engineer on a healthy team. And so.
Yeah, these are great points. one of the things that Nono and I think Mike hit on was, finding that signal to dig deeper. Like one of the things for me is if I see tasks rolling over from sprint to sprint, to me it's like there's a signal going off right there that we might not be able to figure out what the issue is in a retrospective, but this is where I feel you have the point to leverage your relationships with the people in your team to ask them, maybe there's something going on in their life. Maybe there's something that is distracting them from their work. Maybe they have their focus split in too many directions. And to me, this is the opportunity. Leverage that relationship, be open, be a little vulnerable, ask those right questions, and, outline some of the challenges that you may be having and try to figure out a path forward, especially with that just first step to getting that result.
Absolutely. I feel like just from this conversation already, we have a lot of empathetic leaders in the room, which is very nice. That's also my engineering or my leadership way. Go ahead, Mike.
If you can't see it, you can't learn from it. And to Jason's point about the idea of a retrospective, like if something has been bumped from week to week for a cycle, it's time to drop that and then ask why. Like the idea of a retrospective practice comes out of your data very often. And it is, if you approach it again with like kindness and humility, it is much more revealing than you would ever expect going into it.
Absolutely. Thank you for the discussion. It was great. I'll move on to my next question. Our next question. As engineers, very actually perfect timing. As engineering leaders, part of our responsibility is to grow our wonderful engineers in their career. Can metrics help in that sense or deter? No, could you get us started here?
Yeah, I'll take it. Thank you. So it's interesting because we are talking about team performance metric, and now we are shifting and making a zoom on individual. And the metrics that we pick for the team might not apply for an individual because each individual have different goals in their career. So I think that we can definitely have metrics, but those metrics needs to be tailored to the engineer goal, where people are currently and where they are willing to go. For example, for someone who is willing to move to a staff level, I think that the metrics will be more specific on the type of project that they will work on, the complexity of the project, and the number of engineers they will lead in this project, the number of technical documentation they will write. I don't know the number of, like, you will also focus on the tech depth or like all the technical aspect of the work those people will do, mentorship and all of this. And if you take someone who is more junior, I think it will be lighter, like the ability to complete a project with a minimum guidance, for example, will be some of the criteria that you will use. So, and those metrics, like, because metrics, when we hear metrics, we think about number. When I hear metrics, I see a dashboard with a Gaussian and green and red, but sometimes there are metrics that are not necessarily tangible in the sense that you will count, for example, how many projects, how things have been, but it's not going to be like, okay, let's look at the dashboard and let's see from the dashboard, here is interpretation that we are making. So it's not as straightforward as it can be for a team performance metric, where you look at for example, the number of bugs that you are accumulating over time. Yes, here you're able to say something, but when it comes to the career of people, it is not as specific. And I think a good way, for example, to determine some metrics for the career of people is to look at the career ladder, the career framework, which define what are the different skills that an engineer needs to master to be able to move to the next level. And based on each of those criteria, try to find a way to come up with some metrics. For example, if you think about collaboration and working on meaningful projects, try to make sure that this person has the opportunity to lead some projects where there are more than one engineer. So those will be some signals that will be directly tied to the person's career. And sometimes there are metrics like that cannot be measurable. Like if you are coaching someone toward developing some soft skills, those soft skills cannot necessarily be measured, but you will see some examples, this person demonstrating over time those skills. So yes, I think it's great. It's very important to have metrics, but I would, for developing people, I would also talk about having career conversation. And this can be a metric. Am I having career conversation? Is this
How
career
often?
conversation actionable? How often am I having those career conversations? And what is coming? What are the action items that we are taking from those conversations? Are things also that you can look at, set some goals and see if you are able to deliver on those goals, and short goals, not a year goal, but really goals that you can measure quarter after quarter.
Iteratively. Yeah, it's not a one-time conversation. It's a continuous conversation. Yeah, well said. Mike?
I actually want to build on a point that Nono just made about tangibility.
Mhm.
And one of the things, there is so much around us as engineers that is easy to lose track of. And certainly, like, the experience of engineering can often be we sit down in front of a machine, a problem, whatever it is, and 6 or 8 or 10 hours later, we sort of wake up and come to. And maybe we've made progress and maybe we haven't, and maybe our back hurts and we're tired and our desk looks exactly the same as it did before. And we don't, it's often very difficult to know what progress means or looks like in that context. Most of us, I think, are trying as hard as we can all the time to do our jobs well and to get better at them. But if you don't have some sort of measurement over time, some way of keeping track of the progress you've made, the goals you've set for yourself, and how you've moved towards them, the things that you've learned, it can really feel quite alienating. Not just alienating from your work, but alienating from like your own sense of self-esteem and progress and so on. And having a set of measurable goals for yourself in terms of engineering prowess, in terms of effectiveness, in terms of what you've worked on, not only lets you as an engineer feel like, 2 years after you've started this job or this major project, like we're really making progress. And suddenly, you're you're just as tired as you would have been, right? You've worked just as hard, but suddenly you can see you've made experience. You've made valuable progress, and so on. It changes the experience completely of advocating for your own career, of advocating for your own, the success and recognition that you should have at work, and all of these things ultimately add up, right? The difference between fasting and starving is whether or not it's your choice, right? It's whether or not you have agency over what is happening to you. And I think the same thing is often true in terms of self-analysis and growth, especially when you're working with somebody, a boss who should be there to help you advance and champion that growth, right? And to be able to provide that, to be able to bring an evidence-based conversation to that, is rewarding and empowering in a way that I think most people don't appreciate. Certainly, I mean, Jason made this point earlier on, that like every professional athlete in the world has a stopwatch and a scale, right, and knows what they're aiming for.
Right.
And I think that I think it's possible for the same thing to be true of us, right, in engineering and leadership positions as well.
Absolutely. And you also mentioned empowering is, I think, is an important word here too. You want it to feel more empowering and not disempowering, which is a great segue to my next question. Why do you think measuring the effectiveness or impact on an engineering team via metrics is controversial? No, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I can start with that. So we talked about those team metrics, and so as soon as we start setting metrics and goals, that's something that we are working toward too. So for engineers, if we say, okay, now our team effectiveness is going to be measured based on these metrics, that's what we are going to run toward to. And by doing so, we might leave some other aspect on the side and focus on just um, trying to hit those metrics. And that's why it's super important that those metrics be aligned with the company objective, have an actual goal, and we know why those metrics exist and they are serving a purpose, and hitting those metrics is our goal. But there is a way to gamify certain metrics, for example, and this really leads us to a place where if we don't set the right metrics, we can end up in a place where people will just try to hit those metrics, but this won't reflect the actual health or effectiveness or productivity of the team. So we really need to pay attention to to the metrics that we are setting, and also just sharing with the team that those are the metrics that we are trying to hit, but we shouldn't compromise on quality, on all the principles that we have defined. We shouldn't try to rush like technical documentation, because, for example, the tech spec is not something that we measure clearly, and people could start and go and rush for that just to be able to hit certain metrics and move fast. But moving fast doesn't mean that we are moving safe. We might have to come back. So paying attention to the risk of accumulating tech debt and having people having their eyes on just the metrics and losing the sight of other things that we might not have considered, because sometimes we have metrics, but over time, as we are moving forward, we realize that we forgot to take in consideration some other aspect of the business. And just because we are driven by our metrics, I think it puts us in a place where there are some angles that we might not see, because our goal is just to hit the metrics. Those metrics are here to exist, and it's also important to consider that we might be wrong at a certain point, and that hitting those metrics might not be a synonym of being successful, like achieving all the goals. So we constantly need to keep our eyes open on how we are delivering and reconsidering if we are moving toward the right direction, even if the metrics are saying so, considering all the aspects, all the things that are not tangible or measured, to make sure that things are moving the right direction.
Absolutely. No, there's actually a question related to this in our Q&A. With the recent discussion about developer productivity metrics, McKinsey, et cetera, how do you overcome resentments in engineering teams or individuals to use metrics? I think this is a tough question to answer. Mike, do you have thoughts?
Oh, I've got plenty. I can see Jason leaning in though.
Okay, Jason, do you have thoughts?
I was just going to say, so we've kind of gone through this transition as MailChimp. It's been a few years though that we got purchased by Intuit. So as we were making that transition, there were new metrics that we had to incorporate into how we do work. And I was making that transition. They were a lot different from the way MailChimp approached work. Honestly, we were very qualitative and subjective when it came to MailChimp and the way we measured people's performance. But as we went to Intuit, it's data-driven, everything. So, there was a bit of resentment during that transition. But I think it takes some time to, start measuring these things. And then you do check-ins, right? You need to make sure that these metrics are the right ones that we need, and take input from the team, take input from the organization. And I've seen an openness to make adjustments to these metrics, which over time, as we look at these data points, has kind of overcome that resentment, and has allowed at least team members that I work with directly, to kind of overcome that and understand that this is kind of helping us get over that subjectivity and some of those biases that we honestly saw when we were at MailChimp. Things are very objective, data-driven. Calibrations are a lot more clear on what the goals are. So it's been easier for us to create that vision for our team, then break it down into specific strategies to make sure we achieve those things. And honestly, it's allowed us to get more buy-in, and it's also caused openness on our team for people to have that psychological safety to say, I'm not sure I agree with this one. Here's why. It starts a discussion, we make adjustments, and we kind of move forward.
So it takes time and open discussion about it, and then showing the value impact, I think.
Yeah, I mean, change is hard, right?
Change is hard. Yeah, change is hard. Mike, did you have?
Jason, yeah, I had a question for Jason. You mentioned that there was a transition period there. There was a period of resentment. Was there a moment in there that really turned it around for you? Like, was there a moment, a conversation, a change of things where you said, "Oh, know what, this might work. This might be an interesting thing to believe in"?
I don't know if there was an exact inflection point, but as we kind of did our quarterly reviews, I could just see the change in people's behavior and their engagement, where they saw those numbers and they took some pride in those numbers. And we got to this point where we called it, ABC, always be crushing. So like people were like trying to drive towards that all the time, and getting that 1% every day. People saw that. They saw that we were delivering on projects more. They saw that the narrative was changing on their team and how they were perceived. So once people start seeing that, they buy in, and they start engaging more. And I've seen a substantial increase in our velocity, and it's exciting, honestly.
Wow.
I think that point about metrics that you can take pride in is really important, right? I think one of the reasons that metrics are controversial is that so many of us in our careers have been on the wrong end of misused or badly used or deliberately, maliciously used metrics in our time. Microsoft did stack ranking for a decade. In stack ranking, pretty straightforward stuff. You just take a team, you measure them along one axis, and you fire the bottom 10% of it. And if you game it out for just 10 seconds of thinking about it, then it turns out that if you want to keep your job, all you need to do as an engineer is ruin one other person's career on a 10-person team, right? And the environments that has bred are incredibly toxic, right? Microsoft historians refer to that as their lost decade of productivity. And I think that the idea of misused metrics is so pervasive in an industry where stack ranking is real, where sort of arbitrary choices around, like, can you imagine going to any of your colleagues, any of the humans you work with, and say, we are going to rank you based on a single axis? Like that's your entirety, that's the entirety of your representation to this organization, is where you fit on a chart. Like you might as well be managing your engineers by height or weight, for all the sense that makes. And I think that, but finding a place where the metrics that we're talking about are a conversation, an agreed to conversation that lead us somewhere where we can be engaged with and proud of being, is a very different experience for a lot of people than a lot of engineers, particularly veteran engineers, because there's been a lot of naive and uninformed leadership in this industry for a really long time. Is a conversation that we have to spend a lot of time building trust until we can get to a point where we can get past that shape of conversation and into, this is about making you more effective. This really is about helping you grow. But I can understand the anxiety, right?
Mhm.
Particularly from people who've been in environments where they never want to go back to, because metrics only came up when it was time to fire somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does often create fears, and the resentment is actually the fear to not be able to meet those metrics. Like, how am I going to do that? And creating an environment which is safe, where people understand that this is not binary, and why we are doing this for this reason, and we are not trying to measure how you are specifically doing, is helpful. And that's why the metrics are for the team. And when you start having metrics for individuals, like how many pull requests, how many line of code, then yes, people get in the defensive mode. And this is the worst that can happen in a place, because then it's a survival mode where everyone is really just trying to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. This is a really good segue actually into just listing a few metrics that would be bad. What metrics would you advise not using? No, start with a few.
So the pull requests, the number of pull requests, and I know that sometimes people look at this, and I understand that, especially as a senior software engineer, you need to deliver code, but it's not the only metrics. These metrics cannot be used alone. You need to consider the other things that are happening around. There are things that are invisible, like the mentorship that you are giving when you sit with another more junior engineer and pairing with them. So taking this in consideration, the number of bugs that you are introducing, because it's never you alone. We are a team. We succeed together. We fail together. The number of meetings you are attending. Also, I know now we have a metrics in some companies. How many times are you coming to the office in person? It's a metric for certain. It is, I mean, I'm lucky to be at Airbnb where this is not the type of metrics that we are using, but I know that this is a metric. So I will name those few and let Jason and Mike come up with the other.
Jason, do you want to take a swing at that? Oh, you're leaning in. I'm ready too, but when you're done.
So Nono had some good ones. Yeah, like pull requests is one that I kind of try to stay clear of. This is a good question. I know availability and uptime is a really important metric that people talk about. I'm not sure it's the best metric to use. I think it's better, to potentially break that down to a little more granular to understand what is impacting that uptime and try to find metrics that will be helpful around that to try to make sure we're improving that. I know some of the golden signals bother me a little bit, like number 500 you get. Sometimes that might not be actually impacting the user experience. There might be something outside of that experience that might not be that may be impacted, but the user experience hasn't changed. So some of those are some of the ones that I'm just not a fan of.
Yeah, no, I can totally relate to that. I think a lot of organizations that use those metrics that you like uptime, I think that's like a starting point, and then ideally they progress beyond that to more granular. But a lot of times organizations just stay there, and it's not really diagnosable. Sometimes uptime will be very high, but actually there's been a lot of incidents, or it'll be low and there's no user impact. I think the latter rarely happens. I agree with that. Mike, what do you think?
That's a trap that a lot of places fall into, of conflating the things that are easy to measure with, things that are meaningfully worth improving, right? And a lot of places fall into this, we can measure it, therefore this is going to be what we measure, because measuring things is easy. I have a slightly more sort of longer term view of what poor metrics are. And I think that there's also the question of where your organization is in their path towards adopting and trusting metrics. I think that there are some metrics like, days of coding, rework, a whole bunch of other things that are actually quite noxious if you introduce them on day one as being meaningful. Whereas if you start to focus on metrics that are, the responsibility of leadership to improve rather than the responsibility of individual engineers, then you can spend a lot of time building trust towards the idea of metrics that then only become useful once people have confidence that the metrics are being well used, right? Metrics can be a very sharp knife, and in the wrong hands, waving them around, they can be quite, they can cut a lot of your colleagues' careers short, inadvertently or occasionally not. But for us, like the most interesting metrics often become the ones that are really about specific engineers, but it's not possible to have that conversation until people have a sense that metrics are being used in bad faith, or in good faith, are not being used in bad faith. Oh, geez. But just as one example, we look at one here. It's called rework, which is work that needs to be redone after some period of time, right? Like if we need to revisit this patch, if we need to revisit that corner of the, that contribution, whatever it is, after a certain period of time, if we find that an engineer or a team are churning on a piece of code, right? If we start out with that metric, then people get quite reasonably quite anxious and defensive about whether or not, this is our competency called into play. But if we've got a trustworthy relationship there between teams, individual engineers, their managers and leaders, then we can start having conversations about what is being miscommunicated here. Is this demand from the client unclear? Are we going back and forth because the client can't make up their mind, right? Are we, what is it that is away from the engineer's desk, that is away from the engineer's scope of responsibility, that is causing this churn to be, to that engineer, seemingly necessary, right? And that is not a conversation that you can have on day one, right? That's a conversation you can have on day 200. Once the metrics and the value of having metrics in play has been proven a little bit at a time over time.
Absolutely. I'm going to segue. We have 5 more minutes. I'm going to segue to our next question. When is the right time to introduce metrics into an engineering organization? Does anyone want to share their perspective of adding metrics to an org that didn't have them prior? Jason, would you like to start?
Yeah, cool. So I will go back to MailChimp. We at the beginning we had no metrics. We didn't really measure things. Everything was very subjective. Again, it was a lot of things were based off how someone felt about it. And I would say now that we're part of Intuit and we have some clear objectives and we have some objectives internally within our organization and within our team, I think you want to start almost immediately, like start at a very high level. Something very simple. We were just talking about uptime, but it's like, let's start with availability. Let's start with how quickly we are answering pages or resolving pages. And then that could give us a point to start to get a little bit more granular, figure out where we can make improvements, increase the team's velocity. That's another thing I like to look at. It's like, how much work are we getting done within a sprint? Like I kind of want to know, not at an individual level, but as a team, like over a quarter, like, are we being consistent? Like, if we're not being consistent, like, were there anomalies that happen within that quarter? And we try to make note of those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
To make sure that we're giving ourselves a fair grade, a fair assessment.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes sense. Anything to add, or shall I move on? I have a survey question. Go ahead.
What is the best time to plant a tree? The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now.
Okay.
Right.
Right. Yeah, like most things, just get started. Yep, absolutely. I do want to pivot to surveys because I'm very curious what your all answers to this is. I would say lots of companies use surveys. It's prevalent. It's been prevalent in every company I've worked at, whether it's ENPS or some form of getting team sentiment on how things are working. Do you find survey data helpful? No, would you like to answer to begin?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, survey data are obviously helpful, but it depends on like the level of details that you have. So usually when you get the survey details, sometimes it can be difficult to dig, but at least it is always awareness. Having data gives you awareness. And but those results don't mean anything if you don't do anything about it. And if you don't take action, sometimes we will do survey on a regular basis, but in between, nothing is being done. We are not necessarily working towards something. So it is important when those results come to sort of decide what is the most important element we want to focus on and to start taking action on those elements and measure the impact of those actions that we are taking. And also one thing which is important to do is also to understand, so for companies that don't take survey regularly, the moment when we take the survey is super important, super critical. Like if you take a survey during a very difficult time for engineers, if we are working towards something, the result might not necessarily be accurate. And if you take it in a time where things are slower, you will have different results. So what matters is like the consistency, taking them regularly over multiple years and being able to compare them and add some context to all those results to be able to measure them. But the actions that we take matter, and it's not taking the survey just for the sake of taking the survey and then talk about this for a few weeks and then move forward with our work. And then when the time comes, we focus on this again and we say, we have not made progress. Yes, we have not made progress because we didn't work on that. So
actions taken. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm willing to take that argument a step further and say that taking surveys rather than having actual data is a symptom of failing leadership. Like asking everyone for their impression of how they're doing rather than having real information that tells you how they're doing is a pretty clear indication that, like you say, the action won't be coming there, right? I think that surveys are a symptom of an unwillingness to lead. as often as not, and to make difficult changes on the part of leaders. It's a way for people to convince themselves that they have listened to people, that people in their organization have been heard. But like, have any of you on this call, have any of you anywhere, ever seen an organization that said, as a result of this survey, the following issues have been filed and the following due dates of the following changes will be made on the following dates? We expect that from every single software bug that we file.
Right.
And we never, ever see that in surveys. So I mean, everyone wants surveys because everyone wants their team to feel heard. But I think we can aspire to something greater than that.
Yeah, I think it's contextual, to be honest. I think there are some companies that do that act as you're suggesting, but I actually do think some companies do take the data and act upon it. As a leader myself, I'm doing that right now. Like, I'm literally making changes based on survey that. But to be honest, the survey, if anything, it supported a theory I had, and this theory came from conversations I had with my folks. So if anything, it was just more of a correlation for me to then actually truly act on the changes that I had in mind. But I completely agree. I think probably holistically, a lot of times action isn't taken. So it's on us to take on that action.
Let me push back on that a little bit and say that if you had really good metrics around the performance of your organization, it would have given you more and better data about your intuition as a leader, and that you could have equally well acted on that data and equally well acted on that hunch through the data, and a lot of other ones, I'll bet you.
Yep.
And just adding that there are metrics, there are criteria like the sense of belonging that metrics cannot necessarily measure. So metrics cannot necessarily measure, and that's why those surveys are important to understand how do people feel connected with their folks, with the team. And that's why we see the limitation of metrics, like metrics for people belonging sentiment doesn't exist. We need those survey. And even if we are not, I think that even if no concrete actions are being taken, we need to continue to take them, because at a certain point there will be people who will start taking actions on them. So taking them is the first step. And of course we need to move to the next step, but at least we need to continue to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you. I knew surveys was going to be a controversial, interesting conversation. And there are a lot of good questions that we'll answer in Slack. So thank you, everyone. That was so insightful. I was actually computing metrics based on the insights you all provided, and it was 10 out of 10, 5 stars. It's a joke. Thanks for laughing.
Thank you, Limei, for leading that.
Thanks. All right. Thanks,
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. We'll be heading over now to Lead Dev Slack in the Effective Teams channel. Please head over there to continue discussion. There are a lot of great questions. And thank you so much for your time.